I want to talk to Kevin first, calling in from Arizona. Kevin, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hey guys, how's it going?
Going good.
Good.
Ready to party, ready to play some b-ball, ready to just get into the game. I don't know, still bringing the Space Jam vibes in here. Trying.
I'm interested to hear your perspective on something, because this is something that I don't pretend to have a lot of confidence in. But it's a study that I came across. It came out of Johns Hopkins Medical Center back in 2019. And so they did a study where they basically had people who had different psychedelic experiences talk about their experience. And I think they had just over 3,000 people. And so it was split between psilocybin, so magic mushrooms, LSD, ayahuasca, and DMT. And they found that 25% of people before their experience were atheists or self-described atheists, and after it was only 7%. So I'm curious to hear your perspective as to why it seems that people who have these powerful psychedelic experiences tend to become more theistic rather than less or the same.
Well, I mean, like, if you've ever had an experience like that, which I plead the fifth on my own experiences, but like, it can be very convincing to the untrained person who doesn't know exactly what's happening. And I'll be honest, I'm not an expert in the field of biochemistry. You know, I couldn't explain to you the exact ins and outs of what's happening whenever drugs like that are being ingested into your system, but it can be a very powerful thing. Like, if you've never encountered anything like that before, and suddenly you have this object that put inside you makes you see these crazy, wonderful things. Yeah, like, I could see how you might be more convinced of something beyond what's right in front of you because you had a personal experience that was kind of crazy and it's hard to explain. It doesn't make sense in the regular everyday world sense. But, you know, for me, I just go back to this idea that, well, yeah, this thing happened because a specific chemical interaction that we can study and understand was going on in the body. We know that because, like, different doses of this thing can make you experience more or less of these effects. So, like, I don't think it's us like traveling into a different dimension or us talking to God. But, you know, I can look at that and say, like, yeah, that's why it is. But I'm privileged in the sense that I've been talking about atheism and stuff for a couple of years, talking about skepticism and stuff. So, like, I'm surrounded by people who are calling out each other's bullshit all the time. If you have a very significant personal experience and you don't have people in your immediate circles that are, you know, talking to you about that, then I can see how that could lead you to a different conclusion.
I could definitely see that as well. And that's something I've talked with a lot of people, and it's kind of funny how consistent the experience is for the people that I talk to. And it's amazing how so many things recur in people, even without necessarily being primed to understand that would happen. Three things that I noticed are really common amongst pretty much all experiences is a sense of timelessness. So this kind of idea that the perception of time that we have is perhaps biased by our own sensory perceptions. So we kind of have a way to see the world that, in a sense, is very limited in that we can only see it through our own eyes. And so, like, the second thing is ego dissolution. So a sense that our own personal experience is not the be all and end all, and that in some way it's almost like it kind of breaks down our external barriers. Like, we become very attached to our name and where we were born and our beliefs and our preferences and all of these things, right? We see that as who we are. And in a sense, not just when I had a psychedelic experience, which was really powerful, but I had the same experience when I did the float tank therapy, essentially. Have you ever done that?
I haven't done the float tank therapy, but I have done other things. And I have experienced that sense of timelessness. I thought I talked to God one time. At least I had the illusion of talking to God. But even afterwards and in that moment, I'm kind of like, this isn't really what I think it is, but it just kind of felt like that. Yeah, like, there is some kind of commonality to people's experiences, which is interesting. And if you, like, look at the psychonaut community and stuff, you know, the rational psychonauts that try to look at that. Yeah, you know, they talk a lot about this, about how reality itself might be just entirely based on our own perception of things, that perception itself is reality. And I always thought that was kind of an out there idea until like I kind of had some experiences myself, and I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. Like I have a lot more empathy for people who understand the world through that kind of lens. But I still go back to this idea of, well, I can still make predictions when I'm not on those substances, like about what can happen to people. And that leads me to believe that there is something external, outside of myself that's happening rather than me being the baseline. But, like those experiences are very powerful. So I empathize with that.
So in a sense, do you think it's deceiving us in a consistent way? Like, do you think people who have these experiences and then switch from being an atheist to becoming a theist, do you think it's like a consistent delusion, like a mass delusion in a sense?
I don't know about mass delusion. Because like, go ahead, Kelley.
I think it's an effect of the drug. I mean, speaking as somebody who's been to over 200 Dead concerts, and take that with however many grains of salt you wish. But I have seen a lot of people that have had these hallucinogenic experiences, and I have seen that same story over and over and over again. And when I hear that, I think to myself, this is what the drug does to you. Just like it might dilate your eyes, it makes you have this type of experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the effect that you're getting is the drug, and people are interpreting it as a more godly experience instead of as the drug experience. And I think that's maybe why they turn more towards theism afterwards, because they think they had a divine episode instead of just a drug episode.
Yeah. And also, I don't know what
I look at it in a sense. Sorry, you want to go ahead?
Well, I was just going to say too, I don't know about the specific John Hopkins study you're talking about. But atheists too, if they're using the word atheist, that's interesting. But if we're just talking about secular people in general who don't have like a codified sense of like beliefs and maybe have like an in-depth philosophy of like their worldview or something, like I can see how that can be more, again, like convincing. Whereas again, like I'm talking from a privileged perspective, someone who's a part of the atheist community of Austin, who talks to a bunch of skeptics and is just interested in this kind of stuff in general. How I view my own experiences is going to be reflected in that upbringing and background too. And if you don't have that, then I could see people be more receptive to that. I used to believe that the Holy Spirit was inside of me and that I could see it inside of other people as well, because I grew up Christian and I grew up in that environment. So I can totally see how people who are, if you're taking drugs and you're hanging out with other people who take drugs, there's a culture there too about how to interpret their experiences, a lens there that you can pick up too. So yeah, it doesn't really surprise me.
That's why I like your show so much, because I'm a theist and I like to be challenged. Like I called in the atheist experience a couple times and I gained some pretty interesting insights, because I think it's important that we spend time outside of our bubble.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like people that disagree with us. And
absolutely.
I think, and that's the reason why I'm calling in, because I don't want to have these experiences and throw logic and reason out the window. Because I feel like a lot of people like Epoch show really annoy me, because they get into way too much woo, and they just throw the word quantum in front of everything, and they're like, quantum consciousness. I'm like, that means nothing. That's like the most ridiculous thing.
Right. I
mean, there are some things that occur to me while I was on it, and it's, in a sense, I almost felt like the mushroom had its own consciousness, if that makes sense. Like, and I hear the same thing from people who take ayahuasca, is that it feels like there's a certain plant consciousness. And yeah, I think it's interesting to think that perhaps humans and plants co-evolved, because you look at like the plants kind of played a factor in our evolution. There's the stoned ape theory with Terence McKenna. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm a little bit familiar with that. I'm kind of reminded of oh gosh, what's his name? The guy who wears white all the time and has the glasses, and he does that show about drugs. I can't remember. I'm gonna kick myself later. I'm gonna kick myself later. But yeah, I don't know about the co-development of plants and humans from my understanding of anthropology. I'm not sure how much of that works, but I don't see how, I guess we create man-made substances all the time that affect us in different ways. And I don't necessarily have to think that there's a consciousness there, despite the subjective feelings that I get from it. Like, I take Tylenol if I have a migraine, but I don't know if there's something beyond what the chemical compound is there. But because these other kinds of plants and drugs affect us in more powerful ways, we tend to have, I guess, a more empathetic view towards these drugs. And I think that's why people talk about in the language of these plants having like consciousness and stuff. But again, like I'm empathetic to that only because I've had experiences myself where it's like, whoa, this is crazy. But at the end of the day, when I come down to it, I don't think of it anymore as just, a substance that's interacting with substances in me that's making fireworks go off in my brain, or whatever I'm experiencing at that moment. So
is there something you could see scientifically that would convince you that there was more to it? Do you think there's a way to study it systematically so that we could have some kind of reproducible result?
This is what like this is what the Nova sciences, people know the Novetic sciences, people trying to talk about people's intersubjective experiences and how to measure that. And to be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure what would convince me of that. That would be really hard because I have never experienced anybody else's experiences. And I think we're just now taking the steps to really divide up the human mind and figure out what it means to look at people's experiences in an objective manner. We, like right now we're still working on the equivalent of like when you go to the doctor, it's like on a scale of 1 to 10, how much in pain are you feeling right now? Like that's like what I feel like our technology is at right now in general. So I don't know what kinds of tests would need to be divided up to figure out a difference in that. But I'd be curious to see what other people would say on it for sure.
Like one argument I hear a lot from atheists is the argument from divine hiddenness, that because we don't perceive God, and it kind of comes with a bit, if I'm being honest, it comes like a false presupposition that God wants us to know that God exists. Like that's the number one priority of God. From my own experiences, my perception is that God is like an ocean of consciousness and we're all like drops of water or say a wave in the ocean, right? Like we're part of that. And it's kind of like, I feel like human subjective experience is God's way of experiencing novelty and experiencing adventure and experiencing things that a God is unable to experience, if that makes sense.
We're going into some different topics here.
And all powerful. But I feel like that came out of the psychedelic experiences that I felt like I'm a human being kind of experiencing that almost as a sense to be able to learn, right? And I feel like that's where it comes from. And I feel like the argument of divine hiddenness, that's a topic for another day. I don't want to get into that right now because we can
I do have to kind of wrap up this call right here, but I'll say this to this point. And then Kelley, I'm sorry because I feel like you have chimed in too much on this conversation. But so the argument of divine hiddenness is more impactful when we're talking about the Christian God, right? Because the Christian God has at least in Jesus, like has made it explicitly his mission to like know people and to like save people, right? So like there's more of an imperative there for the Christian God to be, revealed in the world. But if we're talking about a deistic function of God or even a more abstract pantheist version of God, then the divine hiddenness argument doesn't have as much traction. So I think in context there might be a difference. As far as like,
I appreciate it.
Yeah. As far as like the experience of God, like I don't know, I as a secular person, right, I don't have any particular reason to, even on those kind of drug experiences that I've had, to have any meaningful, there's no meaningful way to me to describe those experiences with the language of God or the language of divineness, because I just don't know what that means at the end of the day. Is it extraordinary and outside of my usual experiences? Yes, but I don't know if that means that it's supernatural in any sense, or even like beyond what's capable of this universe, because as far as I'm aware, I'm still in this universe and those things happen to be it's just that I just had just a weird perception at the time. So I don't know. I've yet to be convinced that I have to use the language of the divine to really fully encapsulate what's talking about there, because I think that it's such an intersubjective conversation there that people end up talking past each other at the end of the day. But I do have to go ahead and get some other callers here, Kevin. Thank you for your call in this, and I appreciate your perspective. Great talking to you. And yeah, glad you enjoying the show. I'm glad people are liking, we got different content here at the Atheist Community of Austin. We're not all the same kinds of call-in shows, which is pretty cool. Kelley, do you have anything you want to say on that conversation?
No, I think you pretty much summed it all up. I wanted to break in there at one point, and then you said what I was going to say. So I think you got it all on that one.
Gotcha. Well, folks, I messed up here because I wasn't here last week, and I think this is the first time I've done this. I'm not sure. I forgot to introduce the patron of the week before we got to the callers, and I'm flabbergasted, to be honest with you. I don't know what happened to me, but I was so excited about the Space Jam bit. I think it just kind of got to my head. I think that's what it was. So we're going to announce the patron of the week right now. So this week's patron of the week is we got Pink Gloom. Thank you, Pink Gloom, for donating on the Truth Wanted Patreon. If you would like to support this program, you can do that. Go to patreon.com/truthwanted. Thank you to everybody who donates on there, but we're going to give a special thanks this week to Pink Gloom. And thanks everybody for going there and doing that. This show is run by the Atheist Community of Austin. I am a volunteer of that organization, and so are the most people that work on this show. So all the money that goes to that Patreon helps get me new equipment, helps us get Grubhub sometimes, and goes towards a lot of stuff. So thank you guys who are donating there. Cool. Let's get to some more callers.